Hey everybody, just finished editing a video for you, and what you're about to see is part of the podcast that we recorded with Chuck Lynch. So you can listen to the full podcast on our website at partscounterguru.com, but we were honored to have Chuck with us for a little bit during SEMA week. He is one of the most well-known rebuilders in the world. Chuck works with an organization called AERA, and they are the premier engine rebuilders association. And he's literally done it all in that organization. And he is one of the guys that you need to have on your emergency phone call list in an apocalyptic situation for sure. So I've been wanting to talk to Chuck for a little while. I talked Jay into it. Basically, we pitched the whole EV movement scenario to him and wanted to hear the perspective from somebody that deals with rebuilding and repairing a lot of internal combustion engines and leads that process in the automotive industry. So, without further ado, here we go.
So here's the thing. Okay, so we're talking about engine parts and moving parts, right? Now, Chuck, you've watched our podcast. You've been a fan of our YouTube channel, and we've recently released several videos. And I don't know if this was a
I'm leaning in. I can't wait for this.
intent by Keith, because Keith's at the helm back there editing all these videos and the audio stuff that we do, and we work together trying to get these things released. But the last three videos that we've released and podcasts, we've talked heavily on alternative fuels, electric vehicles, hydrogen fuel cell type vehicles, and those sorts of things. So we kind of want to get into that a little bit with you, Chuck, and wonder what the impact is to an organization like yourself. And then, of course, your members. How is that impacting that aspect of the business? Because obviously with an electric vehicle or an alternative fuel type vehicle, you don't have as many moving parts as you may have had in a just a gasoline or diesel engine, especially when it comes to EVs. So where does that play into your broader forecast of the future for the organization?
Quite honestly, the biggest challenge is education, though. It's like we're reliving the pioneer days of rail. Everybody's got a different plan. Which type of batteries they're going to use, how they're recovering energy. It's like we're at the wide gauge, narrow gauge railway. So what are we going to do here in a go forward basis? Again, so education for us, absolutely. I know this is a topic that was addressed in San Diego at the PERA convention a couple of years ago. Hey, where are we going to go with EV stuff, and can we bring it in to our shops? So it's on the minds of people, but how do you address it? And then also battery servicing. You take a look at Jasper Engines. They've been in battery business in electric motors business for a long time. In my tenure there, we actually even worked with a group of research engineers for the military, because batteries are a challenge. They're still working on reliability, serviceability, reproducibility of batteries. So
stability as well.
Yeah, it's a multi-pronged effort. I got to understand the battery. It's kind of like the engine control stuff has driven the machine shop to being more of an underhood technician too.
Right.
Because used to, the engine didn't really change much once it got in the vehicle. But you look at now, the engine changes a lot with the ancillary controls.
Okay, yeah.
So although the electric motor seems pretty simple, what about all the command decision stuff that's telling it what to do?
Right.
Well, and this is, your railway analogy is pretty interesting. So in a lot of ways, it sounds to me like it's almost Wild West. So you've got obviously the big name in the room, Tesla. And then you've got GM coming out a few weeks back and saying, okay, well, we've got a Hummer EV now, and we're going to retool our Spring Hill plant, and we're going to start rolling off Cadillacs that are in our Ultium platform, and they're doing things their way. And then you got Ford out here doing, whatever they're doing, and then Rivian signs a deal with Amazon, and they're going to, 100,000 electric vehicles. And then you got Toyota and Hino kind of doing some alternate fuel cell stuff. And there's almost this, and Jay and I kind of hedge our bets on whatever the standard is next year. 5 years from now, that will not be the standard because we'll be in generation 2 or 3 or 4, whatever. Or we're just going to completely move away from battery cells and we're going to go to something else. And I think we're going to see some rapid changes, but there's no standardization. So what's the... is it literally just sort of a watch and wait for the next couple of years? Is there a plan at all to integrate... let's use Tesla, they're kind of proprietary with a lot of their stuff. I guess with California coming out and saying, okay, no more gasoline engines in, what was it, Jay,
2035. I think they followed. They followed the same path as England.
So is it sort of let's recalibrate in 2 years and see what the state of the industry is? Is that a fair assessment right now of where you are?
Absolutely. At this point, I use an analogy a lot about I would rather be dropped into the jungle to find my way out. Either give me a compass or don't tell me anything, because if you tell me I'm going north and I'm really going south.
Yeah.
I love that.
I need a point of reference. So right now that point of reference doesn't exist. So you kind of have to let the fires burn down a little bit.
Yeah. Well, there's standards organizations in the auto industry, and those were established for these very reasons. It almost sounds like some sort of standards organization being put in place for alternate fuel really needs to happen. Without it, everybody has a different map and everybody has a different compass.
Right. Well, as Chuck was saying, Keith, it's always on the minds of everyone, especially in our industry, the remanufacturing industry, about where EVs are going to come into play for us. I kind of lost my train of thought there. I'm sorry, but the electric vehicle it's not a situation where, like he said, he doesn't have a compass. If you don't give him a compass, he has no point of reference. We don't know yet how the impact. We have no idea what the impact is going to be on our engine rebuilding business at this point. But what we do know is this: is that General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, they're heavily involved. And you watch what's going on behind the scenes with all of these OEMs. They are vested. Yeah. They are investing into this technology, so it's not going to go away. So I think now there's more an ever-present time that we should get together and talk about this and be prepared for that 2035 mark, because I think that might be where everybody in that industry has said, okay, by 2035, if the technology is going to be so far beyond what it is now, which it will be, because it grows and changes exponentially. It's going to be interesting by the year 2035. And now we're saying I don't see how they could hit that mark. But that's some time.
Let's turn this around. And Chuck, you can take this wherever you want to take this. I'm going to ask if you could lay out, as I smack my camera tripod over here on my funny bone, if you could lay out a 2-year plan for AERA, like, here's what I would like to see happening by the end of that 2 years that isn't right now, or here's where I would like to see us go in the next 5 years or 10 years. Would you change anything? This is a broad question. You can take this anywhere you want. What specific things would you have your eye on? Are there things that you're just like, yeah, I wish we could do something about that?
Well, I think the opportunities that kind of exist that we can make crossover is we already have people within our industry who are supporting engine rebuilding with, say, rotating electric alternators. So some of that stuff is going to cross over. So I would like to see where, okay, the management component of it. So if we're rebuilding rotating electric, those same group of support engineers and takes this to a point where, hey, we can do a transition from just building alternators, generators to components for EV. So we're not starting without anything whatsoever in our side of the industry. So I think I would like to see that grow. And we constantly have conversation with the guys on the tech line about, hey, how do you grow yourself out of just being the guy who bores and hones blocks or does cylinder heads?
Right.
Is there an education opportunity there? Like, if you start putting content out in your webinars and in the places where you teach, whether that's, online or in person, would it be helpful at all to start suggesting those things? Like, I guess I'm saying, like, is there value there to you all at AERA to just say, hey, shop owners, like, here's something you maybe have, you see where I'm going with that?
Right. We live in a big bowl of spaghetti. It's all intertwined. And so we have to speak to those things anyway. At what effort we put into that, that's still a little bit unknown for us. At what time?
Yeah.
I'm sure you're familiar with like Rematech, some of the other groups out there, Core. There's a lot of this stuff in the periphery. Again, they're ancillary subsidiary components of the engine industry for us, because that's what we're really interested in, the engine stuff. But you have to have your eye on the ball. You can't just sit back and say, well, I guess we'll ride it out until the piston engine goes away. We're still going to have to support that stuff for a long time as well. That said, that's our opportunity to build a bridge, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How much of what the racing industry does affects the rest of your market share? So, like, if NHRA or NASCAR or another, race organization, F1, right, said next year, we're going to run hydrogen, and we're going to see how that goes. I'm just randomly choosing something. Does that tend to dictate? Does the rest of the market follow? Does that have any impact on direction for you? Or no?
It is in the development of the OE side. We all know that. But typically the repair side, we're about 7 years behind anyway. I think Jay's probably had that conversation before. The bell curve at that time has changed. It used to be 3 to 5 years, and it's about 7 years now because of the longevity of vehicles. So I think it doesn't impact this side of the industry that quickly, that 2 to 3 years, but it does give you an idea of what you might see in 7 to 10 years.
So, and that's something else we'll point out too to our audience, that I think the performance side of our industry has such a huge impact on our everyday vehicles now, more so than they ever did before. Wouldn't you say, just based on materials and with the emission controls and stuff like that they put up, we have to kind of reach out to those performance guys that are building those engines to survive and to perform with the tighter tolerances that they use. Wouldn't you say that we do have to really look hard at that performance racing industry to really see
at the very high level?
Yeah.
Your Formula One, of course, and like the rally cars, things of that nature that are really, really pushing the limits of the materials. There's some of the other performance sides that they're not really evolving with modern technology you see on the street, and that is one of the reasons I think that we've seen a decline in followership in certain venues in the racing world. Because, hey, what's that association? I went to it was at a schools conference a couple of years ago, and there were a couple of design engineers from GM there that were really perplexed about, I can't believe I'm designing a car that people don't want to drive. They just want to climb in it and it take me here or there so I can manipulate my latest gadget. I don't care that it's a car. It's just a shuttle. I don't want to walk to a bus station. I want to own it, hop in it in my garage, but that's all I care about. So, the relating that to something that you have, that's still a pitfall. I think that's why you see some of the part suppliers are actually spending more money in rock climbers. They're spending more money in the hot rod diesel truck stuff, because that market, they do want the feedback. They want that recognition of something that those guys relate with. We're free to choose, and that's just become one of the challenges now that less and less people really care about the freedom of the vehicle. I know I'm kind of meandering around a little bit, but that is some of the challenges. You've got the ones that are strong followers and the ones that don't really care. So it impacts our focus.
Right. I get it. Yeah. Back to the EV side of this. So when you go to a shop, and this is just a question that popped into my mind just now. When you go to a shop, does that subject ever come up? I mean, how often do you talk about the threat of that EV market into their business? And do you have those discussions where you say to that shop owner, hey, here's a sector of the EV industry that you could really, get into. Maybe you should start doing that now. And I know Keith asked you a little earlier, is there any intent for AERA to be offering some sort of continuing education in regards to the electrification side of these things and how to rebuild the motors and that sort of stuff? And like you said, alternators, starters, we all get it. If someone's already ahead of the curve, if you will, if they're in that already, and honestly, I'm sitting here today for the first time, and you mentioned Jasper was into rebuilding some of those, and I had no idea that they were already into that, but that makes sense because of who they are.
Yeah, that's why I show up to these things. I always learn something. So, yeah.
Well, they're Jasper Engines has always been very innovative in the industry, in my opinion. I think, Chuck, would you say the same?
Oh, very much so. Like in 2008, when the economy was really struggling, they decided to get into the LED light business and some other projects, for providing heating and cooling. So, yeah, they've always been quite innovative. The electric motor side of the business has been industrial. Kind of an interesting story is that's how I became more familiar with FLIR. FLIR's been around for a long time, but they actually use the cameras to do inspections, insurance inspections on new built facilities, looking for resistance in wiring. Hey, there's a hot spot there. So before you turn this thing over to the new tenant, make sure that it's not going to burn down day two.
Right.
So for those of you that don't know, forward-looking infrared cameras, heavy military application, but now we're finding, I've seen them used in agriculture. They're looking at crops and just odd things. But
that's another sector. That's another sector of the technology industry. The military is always, at that level, which it tends to bleed on out to the everyday consumer. We get into it, and speaking of that, we recently had a podcast on the Hummer EV, and when we were, chatting you up over this past week about having you on, you threw some interesting points out. because we were, the Hummer that's an opportunity for GM, really, I think, to get into the Department of Defense, and there's some interest for those guys.
So
it just kinda
interestingly,
makes
the
sense.
first generation started as a military vehicle,
That's right.
And we've seen that go full circle now, where we're deploying these first on the consumer level, business to consumer, right? And then can we adapt this for military use? So we've done a 180 on how things make their way into the military theater, I guess, a little bit. Drones and other stuff like that, they look to repurpose that kind of stuff now from the consumer side.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
what's your thoughts on that, Chuck? Because you're prior military, and
yeah,
what do you think about that EV Hummer? For me, the first time I saw it, they've got this, the crab track where this thing can, all four wheels turn, and it can ease its way in and out. And if you're out in the, you're in the desert and you're in warfare and you have this thing, to me, it just kind of made sense that it would work in an application like that if it applied to the military. It's quiet. And then Keith brought up another point, which was air filtration. In the desert, you don't have that worry. You don't have that worry of getting it in the engine. There's no intake. So it's kind of interesting that has surfaced as it has, and then the discussion of the Department of Defense being very interested in it. So, but anyway,
absolutely. One of the projects that I know that is being worked on is like our Polaris, the side by side.
Yeah.
In doing a hybrid.
Ooh. Yeah.
So it gives them range, and it gives them two fuel sources, because there's always a contingency. If you take a look, and Jay being prior military too, they tried to make everything a multi-fuel. So all the Hummers, the 5-ton trucks, the 7-ton trucks, whatever, JP4 was the common thread.
That's right.
So I can run that jet fuel to run a heater to heat a tent, to run my Hummer up and down the road, or fly a jet.
Yeah.
So you don't know where you're going to be in the world.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right. Oh, how I love the smell of JP4 in the morning, my friend.
Yeah.
No, seriously, when I was in the Air Force, man, I just you can't get away from it. It's used in everything, and he's right. That's a good point you make there, Chuck.
Again, I'm just here to learn, man. Now I'm like, can I run that Coleman stove on JP4?